that to do with the structure of the city. Douala doesn't really have such a traditional sense. But I would say that South Africa is the city, the country in the African continent that has the biggest art scene, one can say that. Lots of artists, galleries, museums that are working on it. And Cameroon, I guess, is one of the countries that has very little infrastructure for the artists in terms of public spaces or public support. What is your impression? I mean, you have met now some of the local artists. What is your impression about how they're coping with that? What are the challenges? How they working?
Well, one thing I found really interesting was that there was such a lot of painting. And I must admit, my level of understanding of where the visual art scene here is very limited. So I speak with a very small understanding of the broader picture. But all the artists I've met through Douala either are experimenting with urban intervention projects or are painters, it appears. And while that's interesting, I also wonder why. When I was talking to somebody about it, a Cameroonian, they were saying probably because it's the cheapest method of making art. You buy a piece of, or you just get a piece of something and you paint on it, you throw paint on it. And you can be quite expressive about it. Martha was speaking to me about how people here, and it's the same in South Africa, are interested in representational art, something that they can recognize. And I think that's the case in most countries who haven't had where populations haven't got involved in thinking about art in any intellectual way, which is pretty much most of the world. So it's very difficult for people making sort of expressive, abstract expressionism or any kind of related sort of forms sell to the people here. And I find that interesting. I really would like to know a bit more about the arts educational, arts training field. I don't know whether they've had any colleges here that have functioned for any period of time, how they pass on knowledge, whether or not people who are painting in an expressive way can actually paint in a way that's representational, whether there's an attempt to try to get into that. Because I think it's also, on one level, it's interesting to get into this expressive mode, but I also think it's incredibly limiting. And even though people are picking up on ideas of sort of African symbolism, etc., I think if there's no intellectual center in which they're engaging with these ideas critically, I think it's going to very quickly end up being a very boring art scene. And, you know, it's not my cup of tea. I know other people like it, so I'm speaking from personal taste more than anything. And my sense of the contemporary art world is that painting is coming back, but there's a very clearly intellectual project involved in thinking about new painting. I'm not sure that that's the headspace here in that strong a way. And that's why also I said earlier about photography. I think there's a real gap and huge possibilities about getting involved in photography. Video also is an interesting possibility, but it's also it's also technically, I've seen a lot of crappy videos. I wouldn't want to see that sort of thing. People suddenly taking on a video tradition here and creating crappy video work. But I think there is lots of interesting possibilities, and Godile has done some really interesting stuff. So there's obviously things to draw on. And I think there's contrary to what Martha was saying about not having things that say this is Douala. I think actually there's probably a lot of things. I mean, I speak from correctional, so I don't know everything here, and I really don't know the types of things that make a place strong. But I notice this cloth story, which is probably all over Cameroon. But there's ways about how women wear these cloths and associations, etc. that point to interesting possibilities. And I think it's a sort of experimentation into the micro worlds of people, and how Douala's how do you say people of Doualas, how the people of Douala deal with their local conditions. How do they deal with their everyday life? And I think there's probably lots of interesting things that may seem generic to another place, but actually have a more unique take here. When I look around, I see wonderful opportunities for expressive opportunities for painting, for photography, for sculpture, but I'm not sure to what extent that's being engaged in. I really think the big problem is, for me, what I can gather, is a lack of some sort of intellectual center. I'm not sure if there is one, but it doesn't appear to be strong. I mean, people are very intellectual, and the artists are incredibly bright and incredibly sharp. I mean, compared to some of the artists I engage with in Cape Town, I was completely impressed with how far they're prepared to take things. But I think there's just so far an art scene can go if there isn't a broader set of people who are interacting and giving critical feedback to artists, and artists are prepared to take that on and engage with it in different ways, or new experimentation with other forms. So, yeah. Is that it?